curious, what question did you refuse to answer in a job interview? Story 1. I'm a girl, and have a trade, and have always worked with only men. Most interviews bring up the subject in a polite way, like situational questions asking what I would do if a coworker was being, etc. One particular interview with a company called Schlumberger, the interviewer straight out asked if I have a boyfriend. I said no, more out of shock. He continued on to say that I'm very young and around the age where I'll probably get pregnant. I just sat there and stared. He then asked me if I planned on getting pregnant, because if so, they would not hire me. Every single question he asked was specifically about the fact that I'm a girl, and there were no job-related questions. I just said thanks, but no thanks. Story 2. Why should we hire you when you just got married and will probably be starting a family soon? I initially refused to answer, but couldn't resist by the end of the interview, telling them that ID had my tubes tied for years and literally couldn't have kids. Story 3. What social media do I use? And that I would be required to friend a member of the HR department. Nothing happened. There's a big trial going on at the time over employers' right to spy on their employees online. So they didn't push it. Story 4. What's your zodiac sign? At first I thought it was a joke, but he went on to explain in detail that it was very important that all the signs of his employees were compatible with his to prevent drama in the workplace. Then he started telling me about his past lives. It was a weird interview. Story 5. I got asked to write down my Facebook and Gmail password so they could look at them and deem me satisfactory. I noped the out of there. Not only is it illegal, but it's none of their business. Edit. I remember the job now. It was for a tour guide job, and they wanted to see if I conducted myself professionally in my personal life. Story 6. Not a job interview, but an orientation of new hires. And as an icebreaker for the new employees was to go around and tell people our orientation. So inappropriate. Myself and 3 other new hires noped right out after we refused, and were told the point of the exercise was to create trust in fellow coworkers. Story 7. My race. They were interviewing to fill several positions at an office near downtown, where they were in need of Spanish-speaking workers because the area served is mostly Hispanic. The interviewer asked me what is my race and where is my family from. He asked this because he saw that I'm fluent in Spanish. I am mixed, but look very white. He seemed a little perturbed that I was fluent in his native language. He kept questioning my race and why do I speak Spanish. I let him know that I have spoken Spanish since I first learned to speak. I had dual primary languages in my home. I took Spanish in high school and college. I was hired by the college as a Spanish tutor. Yet he doubted my knowledge because of my light skin. He did this to a girl I was chatting with in the waiting area too. I could hear her interview because they were doing them in cubicles, not private. With her, he insisted she couldn't really speak Spanish. The girl was black, but she was from Belize. Anyhow, we were both hired, even though he failed us on our spoken language portion. She and I wrote grievances and had him removed, as well as our scores corrected. He interviewed another girl I knew who looks very Hispanic, but barely speaks Spanish and does not write it. He gave her a 100. At my office, I found out he had given anyone that looked white or black very low scores, even if they aced the interview. Story 8. Why a pretty girl like you look for a job? You should just find a rich guy and get married. Edit. For context, I was fresh out of high school at 17, and this was the first interview I had ever in my life at a small shipping yard for the position of a clerk. I decided to go college after that. It does get worse as I approach marriageable age, as constant barrage of questions on my plans to get married and how many kids I want to have get into the interview, instead of what I want to bring to the table at work and discussing my career prospects. Women have a big challenge when it comes to be taken seriously at work, especially if you look a certain way. Yes, I do get a lot of probing why I didn't try my hands at sales, as it would be just too easy for you to get a lot of sales during the time I was at marketing. Story 9. The CIA asked me what laws I would be willing to break if I was hired by them. I didn't really know how to answer and said I would have to know more about the situation. I didn't get the job. Story 10. In the course of one interview, I was asked, are you married? Do you have kids? Are you pregnant? When do you plan on becoming pregnant? How old are you? The interviewer then proceeded to tell me she needed to ask these questions because the last LA she hired was pregnant and left from mat leave within 5 months. An interviewer was not happy with that. The kicker, I was interviewing at a civil law firm and being interviewed by a paralegal. Story 11. I had an employer actually ask me if I was a Christian or not. He said that they follow Christian principles in their business and they'd like to know how I would fit in. I told him that it's illegal to ask that question and I'm not comfortable answering it. He ended the interview right there. I didn't get the job, which I'm glad for because working there sounds like my personal, I should have sued and just take it easy for a few years. Story 12. Previous salary. It's none of their business. I will talk about the salary range that I'm interested in, but answering previous salary questions will only you. Story 13. I had a few in the only interview I ever did for a farm machinery sales agent. Can you safely say that you won't have any serious accidents whilst working here? Have you ever been pregnant? Or are you going to become pregnant in the next 8 months? Have you ever had a boyfriend? And if yes, did you have while together? Are you still together? Story 14, do you have any kids? He was the CEO of the company I was interviewing at. I made a face, said, are you supposed to ask me that? He looked surprised and said he needed someone who can be at the job on a regular basis. Then I thanked the guy for his time and left. Story 15, this was during a mock interview while I was in college. The professor had her husband come in, and we had to go in one by one and do an interview, just like in real life. Well, everyone is going in and coming out smiling, not taking too long. So I thought it would be a cakewalk. My turn is next. I go in, and everything is going smoothly. He takes a look at my resume and sees that I was in the military. He asks, tell me about your time in the military. So I tell him what I did, that I worked with a variety of different people from different backgrounds, with different views on life and opinions, and that I supervise people, etc. He says, okay, good, and continues with the interview. Asks a few more questions, then says, tell me about your time in the military. I figured maybe he didn't realize he already asked me that, or maybe it was a test. So I repeated what I said. He starts turning slowly in his chair, looking at the ceiling, and says again, tell me about your time in the military. I just looked at him. He stopped spinning in his chair and looked at me. After about 20 seconds, he says, okay, we're done here. I got a B. Story 16, I walked out when they asked me to sign a ridiculous multi-page non-compete agreement that required me to turn over any intellectual property I ever came to acquire. Story 17, not a question, so much as a request, was a senior in college in 2012, so the job market was still for, and anyone who had graduated college in the last 4 to 5 years was actively fighting for any and all open positions of any sort still, be it in waiting tables, answering phones, landscaping, nannying, under-the-table work, and obviously any entry-level positions. So I managed to get an interview with a marketing firm. I'm sure most of you know where this is going. It was a direct marketing service where you go door to door. My first interview goes well, and am a bit confused as this was in an office park suite office. They purportedly have 55 employees, yet this office suite was 2 offices and a small front desk area for the secretary. Whereas everyone's desk, I asked myself, later that night, I received a call back for a second interview. So for a second weekend in a row, I head back to my hometown, miss my current job, and 2 weekends in a row worth of cash working at a late-night restaurant, and gas money for 2 round trips, totaling in at around 100 and gas 2 full tanks, and a loss of almost an entire 375 paycheck for that half of the month, plus a solid 150 in tips for each weekend missed. Show up for the second interview, and instead of sitting in that little office and answering more questions, meeting people around the office, and the like, they take me and 6 other people outside. We're then told we will be going out in the field for the day and knocking on doors. None of us were told about this, so all 4 of us females are in interview suits and heels. I start immediately hounding the interviewer and insist I'm being told where I'm being taken, and he says he isn't at liberty to disclose that. So I habitually state, let me get this straight, you want me, a 20-something female, to get into a car without state plates, with 3 men I've never met before to go somewhere unknown, to walk around somewhere unknown for an unknown amount of time on the fly. And I have to turn my cell phone off. He just looks at me like a moron after I've spelled out how sketchy this all is. So after some awkward silence, I continue, how dare you lie to myself and all of these other clearly desperate folks about every aspect of this job and cost me money to get here. You if you think it'll come WTHU, and you again if you think I want to go detail this to the BBB. It's then that he flips out and follows me as I head back into the office park. The interview room now has been retransformed into the CEO's office, nameplate and everything. When they asked what I was doing, I demanded my resume back from their pile and told them I'd be spreading the word and make sure others know before coming in here. They freaked out, offered to pay me back for my gas to try and prevent me from reporting them, let them write me a check, and just as I was leaving their office/interview room, a new slew of kiddos, age were shuffling in for their ill-fated interviews. Warned them all and loudly cursed out the CEO again, and was followed out by all 8 people they were supposed to interview again. Being a journalism student, I did the only thing worse than reporting them, which I also did. I got in contact with a local reporter for the paper who was a friend of mine and got them to run an article about scam companies and interviewing vulnerable and desperate recent grads. Their company logo made the header of the page, not necessarily during a job interview. But I was looking to become a supervisor at a previous job and was asked by the hiring manager if I'd be okay with dating his friend to get the job. I refused. Girl that did get the job ended up dating his friend. Before anyone asks, no, I don't regret it not dating the friend. I regret not going to head office and reporting him. Story 18, I work for a major university, And we have an Office of Disability Services, which can assist you in accommodating a disability, etc. So I technically do have a disability according to the university's parameters, and therefore I fall under this protection. I've been shopping around for a different job at the same institution. And in one interview, they actually asked me what my disability was. I was shocked they would ask, since that is pretty expressly forbidden by university policy, and refused to answer. I didn't get a call back, but based on them asking, I didn't want to work there either. I may have dropped an anonymous note to HR about it. Story 19, why do you want to be in this business? It was an excellent question, and I decided that I didn't want to be in that business, so I thanked the interviewer for his time and called it a day. Story 20, which of the other candidates I thought best fit the job? This was an opening in the company I was working for at the time, so all internal candidates whom I knew. Story 21, I may not refuse to answer a question outright, but depending on the personality of the interviewer, I will make jokes about the questions, especially if it's obvious that they think the questions are stupid too. The biggest one for me is, what is your biggest flaw? If I know the interviewer is receptive to jokes, he'll reply with something like a low tolerance for irrelevant questions. We had a good laugh about it and moved on to the next question in the interview. Story 22, would you and your wife be interested in this traveling swingers club I help run? We could show you the town, get you to meet new people. ITLL be fun. I was the interviewer and a guy. Interviewee was a girl. And in case you were curious about what question to never ask in an interview, this is among the top 10. No, I didn't answer it. I just said that we're out of time, and I had to go. HR will show you out. Someone will be in contact. See you later. Goodbye. Nice knowing you. Too bad you can't stay. What happened was that she was banned from ever applying, and since Silicon Valley is so close-knit, I'm sure the HR types got the word out that she was a walking harassment suit waiting to happen. Story 23, do you have any mental issues? That, yes, but I will do any job and be the best you've seen. Don't ask if I'm crazy in your interview. It makes you seem hateful. When I lived in D.C., had an interview with the mayor's office. Mind you, he was a mayor I didn't particularly like. When I got there, it was like 75 people waiting in a big room. When it was finally my turn, they brought me into another room. The first 5 minutes were standard interview questions, but the two 20-year-olds conducting the interview were completely uninterested. Neither of them looked up from their BlackBerries once. I was getting extremely irritated, as I knew I had much more political experience than them anyway. So when one of them, with her face still in her BlackBerry, said, "Tell me 5 things you love about Mayor Finney," I had it. I said, "I think we're done here," and got up and left. That got them to look at me. Story 24, oh. Also, you're okay with having with me and the rest of the guys, right? We like to pay the girls more when they do that. I mean, you'll still get your tips and everything, but you can get more if you us. It was about a month and a half ago. I was applying for a job as a dancer, okay, a stripper at a local strip club right after I turned 18 because I wanted to start making money for college, and it seemed like it'd be easy money. I mean, I understand that there's a stereotype that strippers are slutty, and after meeting some, believe me, there's plenty of truth to it, but it doesn't mean I can put out for every old guy I see, even if he's my boss or colleague. Plus, the guy interviewing me was the manager, who was in his 60s. I'm totally okay with lap dancing on just about any guy as long as he's got singles in his pocket. But actual is completely different and pretty much out of the question in the context of a strip club. The rest of the guys was referring to the bouncers. The fact that the bouncers were in on it and literally their only job is to keep the dancers safe didn't make me feel much better about it. Are they really going to keep me safe if all the other girls are them? And I'm not. They also told me earlier in the conversation that they encourage the girls to actually have in the back room for money. That was what raised a few red flags initially, but having them straight up ask if I was okay with having with the male employees raised more red flags than a parade in Moscow. So I just nope the out of there. It's the only strip club around here that's easy to get to, so I'm giving up on getting a job doing that for a little while. A few weeks later, I told some friends, and they said I should notify the police, so I did that about 2 weeks ago. I don't know what the police are doing about it. TLDR strip club manager just kind of assumed 18-year-old girl is totally into 60-year-old strip club managers. Story 25, how much I was currently being paid. I said that was between me and my current employer. I got the job at a higher salary that I thought they would have offered otherwise. Story 26, I was applying for a government job. I'm Canadian. And one of the questions on the application was, are you native Canadian? Now, not Aboriginal by any means, but I was born and raised in Canada. In most countries, that makes you a native of that country, but not here. As a means of protest, I checked the yes box. I fully expected that if I was interviewed, I'd have to defend my choice to say I was a native Canadian. I was interviewed, but the question never came up. Much to my surprise, I was also hired. Full disclosure, I'm not down on Aboriginal rights, and in fact support said rights. I'm fine with terms like Aboriginal, First Peoples, Original People, etc. At the time, I simply objected to my own government telling me I wasn't a native Canadian. It's 20 years later now. I'm a calmer person, and it isn't as big a deal as it was to me as a young man. Story 27, she asked how old I was. I said, I'm over 21, the oldest age I suppose that anyone could be concerned with. She said, but how old are you exactly? I asked her how old she was. She answered, so then I answered. It was kind of awkward after that, and I didn't get hired, but I think that was a good thing. Story 28, I wanted to volunteer at a pregnancy resource center a few years ago. I didn't even want to work with their clients, mostly help out preparing for events or things like that. I just wanted to volunteer to help what I thought was a worthy cause. They asked me if I engaged in premarital and if I attended a church. I told them I didn't think you needed to attend church to have a relationship with God, and that I wouldn't discuss my life with them. They said that I would have to sign a contract agreeing to abstain from premarital, and that I would have to find a church to attend. I said I wouldn't sign it, and they never called me back. Story 29, are you married? I told them marital status was a protected class, and that I would not answer that question. I got the job. I never reveal my standing in any protected class at work. I won't give away my race, age, religion, or lack thereof, marital status, orientation, etc. Story 30, anything related to race, ethnicity. I won't disclose my ethnicity on an application form. I won't take the bait at interviewers' poorly disguised questions about how I have an interesting last name and they wonder where it's from. It's total and complete bullshit that employers in the U.S. are even allowed to ask a question about ethnicity at any point in the application process. Story 31-0. I have an answer to any question. The interviewer may not like some of my answers, but I'm 37 in the top game of my field, and I don't grovel at interviews. Take me as I am or not at all. You are getting a human being, not a robot. Story 32, as background to this. I had recently graduated from paralegal program and gotten licensed as a paralegal. In my jurisdiction, paralegals are only allowed to practice in certain areas, so the program only taught us how to be proficient in those areas. After graduation, I spent months looking for work before getting an interview for an assistant position. The person who interviewed me asked a few questions, then she gave me some tests to do. One was spelling grammar, to make sure I could edit documents. There was a basic math test, not sure what that was for. The final test was about legal terms issues. There were a few of the terms I was familiar with, but a lot of it I just didn't know because I hadn't studied that stuff in school and didn't have the experience that would allow me to know the answers. I could have filled in what I knew and hoped for the best, but I didn't. I decided not to even try that test at all. So the interviewer comes back in, and right off the top, I tell her I didn't bother with the test. I pull out a copy of my transcript from school and show her that I had a perfect GPA of 4.0. I tell her that I don't know the answers to the questions, but that my transcript shows I'm a smart guy. Anything I need to know for this job, I can pick up as I go. The interviewer was impressed. She said she'd call my references and be in touch. I get home at 1 p.m. At 4 p.m., she emails me to say she's called my references and will need to speak for the lawyers I'd be working with, but that I've probably got the job. I interviewed on Monday, got the job on Wednesday, and started Thursday. Story 33 interview question. At a small consulting firm in D.C., did great work. Friends there with nice salaries and benefits. I put down on my resume. As a consultant at another firm, this line, paraphrasing for privacy and not doxing myself, optimize performance and logistics of new product line, increasing profit margins by 30 at big firm. It's one of my huge achievements, and leaving out details was never a problem for any other consulting firms like McKinsey, e.g. I didn't mention who that big client on the resume that I was working for because most of them are supposed to be confidential. The interviewers, I fell on that bullet. And as I revealed a couple of details like industry, my role, how I did the job, the achievement, etc., she insisted on asking who the client was, which doesn't really matter at that point. I kept rebuffing her, stating that I can't reveal my clients or the product line still in development at the time due to confidentiality agreements. This went on for 5 minutes until the interview basically derailed, and she ended it telling me that I was uncooperative and I shouldn't expect a call. After cursing my luck and damning that wretched woman seriously, who insists on asking such a stupid question, I can't reveal who it is because I breached contract. And in consulting, you should respect your client's privacy. I did get a call a couple of weeks later from a board member who heard about my interview and offered me a job. It was a good year, and my interviewer got flack some months after she left the company because she started revealing details about her clients, which got an entire team at that firm in trouble because of breach of contract. Big lesson, kids. If you have a confidentiality agreement that is still ongoing and hasn't expired, you should respect it, even in an interview for another job. Otherwise, kiss your careers goodbye. Story 34. I have interviewed with several third-party recruiters that have asked what other companies I'm interviewing at. It was an irrelevant question that was only asked so that the recruiters could contact the other companies. Story 35. I sat in on an interview for a PA with my boss. When on the subject of marriage and kids, my boss asked the interviewee if she had married out of love or if her family had arranged it. She answered love, and we thought that was the end of it. He then proceeded to ask if she was raising her kids as Sikhs and if she would be comfortable working in an environment with lots of men. I cringed so much in that interview, but the lady held her own and is actually still working for us. There was no malice in what my boss was asking. He was genuinely just interested in her culture, but went the complete wrong way about it. Just the other week when we were all out for a meal, he kept asking her if his pronunciation of Basmati was right. The best of it is she came from an Indian family, but has lived the Western culture all her life. She's just as clueless as he, but finds it all very hilarious. Story 36, I was actually asked for the username and password to my Facebook, Twitter, and any other social media accounts I may have. I flat said no. That information will not be forthcoming. The interviewer looked up as though to say, just who the do you think you are? And replied, excuse me. I replied that I never saw the use or need for social media. I have the ability to instantly message, call, or go meet people within my circle in person, and I felt that social media was a tool further used to divide us rather than bring us together. He just stared at me until I finally said, I follow a 3P rule when I'm online. I never post anything I don't want my parents, a priest, or a predator finding out, which means you can rest assured that there will be no impropriety to harm your business. I am here to make money by making you money. He continued to stare at me, and I finally said, I'm sorry I seem to be wasting your time. I thank you anyway, and you have a wonderful day. I got a call 3 weeks later, same guy. Actually tried looking me up and couldn't find me or a reference to me. I didn't get the job, but I did get considered. The moral to this tale, follow the 3P rule and never ever ever use your real name, nor should you ever allow anyone else to use your real name if you can at all control it. Story 37 never got one I didn't answer, but I did get who would win in a fight, Spider-Man or Batman. The interview ended with me being called a munger, me calling the interviewer a chicken, and getting hired because I was a good cultural fit. Story 38, anything about salary expectations. Ever, at least not directly. Avoiding this answer simultaneously prevents you from embarrassing yourself by asking far too much or crippling your compensation by asking for far too little. Never answer this directly. Tell them you expect the market value for the position or a salary commiserate with your experience or something along those lines. If it's on an application form, leave it blank until they ask about it in person. Perhaps even ask them if they had a specific budget for this position. You'd be surprised how upfront some employers will be. Then, once you get a feel for what they want to pay for your position, start negotiating for the price you want. It goes without saying that you should both know what the position in question typically gets paid and how much your experience, or lack thereof, will affect that price. E.g., don't expect to be paid like a senior analyst at your first job out of college. Story 39, not me personally, but a friend of mine was asked by a Halliburton interviewer if he would ever lie to your mother. I laughed my off when he told me this because it was Halliburton. I thought about it later, and I'm pretty sure I wouldn't answer that. I'm also pretty sure it's an illegal or borderline question. Story 44th person I had interviewed with. The first 3 went very well. Person 4 is going to be my direct supervisor. He was from Serbia or Croatia, given his accent. This was an interview in the USA, and the discussion went something like this for, how much do you make at your job right now, me? I work for a private company. We're disclosing that to anyone other than my spouse is grounds for termination. For you need to tell me. You will tell me. Me, I'm not going to tell you. For raising his voice, you need to tell me right now. Or this interview is over. Me, I guess this interview is over then. For stood and left the room, and interviewer 3, the VP, came back in after a moment, and I heard some yelling in the hallway. 3 talked to me for a little while and was making odd, small talk and verbally feeling me out. I think he was fishing to see if I was upset or going to file suit or something. He finally asked if I would have trouble working for 4. And if I had any other questions, I asked him if it was important to keep your agreements and stick to one's word. And he said yes. I told him that's why I wouldn't answer. And no, I don't want to work for 4. I never heard back from them. Story 41. I was once asked illegal questions during an interview. I advised them that if they were to write them down that I would respond in writing. They were stupid enough to do so. Once they gave me the questions, I took them, walked out, and went straight to a lawyer. Story 42. I live in Korea. So the interview questions can be very different from what we're used to in the West. It is common to ask what your parents do, if you're married or plan on getting married, how much alcohol you can drink. This is not to determine if you have a drinking problem, but because after-work drinking with coworkers is a big part of Korean work culture. So the more booze you can handle, the better. How much money you have, religion, and when you apply for a job, you have to send a photo of yourself along with your application. If you're not deemed good-looking enough, and often if you're black or Indian or another undesirable race, you won't get the job. It is slowly changing, though. Story 43 in Canada. There are a lot of legal questions. The 2 that I want answer, unless told why, are sexuality, gender identification. So what if I'm male and like dicks? I can serve a latte. Story 44, what was your high school GPA? Who I was when I was 14, 15, 16 is not a reflection of who I am today. On a personal note, I got terrible grades in high school. This would make me look like a slacker on the surface. The real reason my HS GPA is so low, I has daily migraine throughout high school causing me to miss a ton of school and have to take a 6-month medical leave. I'm not going to allow myself to still be judged for that at age 23. Story 45, at an interview for a temp agency, I was asked to sign a release of information form. One of the things on it was a release, so they could check my medical records. I do not let anyone see my medical records, except some other providers. I marked that part out and initialed it before signing. When the interviewer looked through the form, she saw the mark and asked, "What is this?" I casually commented, "I didn't see how my health records would be relevant." She just said, "Okay, I got the job." Story 46, are you planning on having children soon? I still got the job, but left in my first 90 days after finding out some very unsavory things about the owner. Didn't need that craziness in my life. Story 47, 30 minutes into the interview, and I had not yet been asked a question. It was a small business, and the owner talked nonstop for that entire time. I knew it wasn't a good fit prior to him finally asking me a question. Now my wife and I are good Christian Republicans. Before he could even ask, I cut him off saying, "Oh, that's okay. I won't hold it against you. I did not get the job." Story 48, I was a sales manager, and I had this terrible branch manager who typically would pass any female on that was remotely pretty. He called me on my day off to tell me about this amazing girl that he wanted to offer a position to. I told him that I'd go into the office right away and to have her come back for an interview with me. She was SOSO looking, but had huge and wore one of the lowest plunging shirts to an interview that I've ever seen. Being a sales-oriented position, I asked her to role-play a sales scenario. Not everyone's favorite thing to do, but it's a great way to hear someone's technique when selling, and if they pick up on the subtle clues people drop during conversations. She flat out said no. She wasn't comfortable because she wasn't familiar with our product's multiple red flags here. I thought she just had jitters being in an interview, so I let it go. Of course, that bugged me. And towards the end, I asked her to role play again, but this time to profile and sell me on something that she sold in the past. She stuttered and stumbled in about 10 seconds into trying said, I don't like role playing." Needless to say, I immediately broke my manager's heart by telling him what a disaster she was. He proceeded to chase her down to see what kind of car she drove. Though, our branch was full of huge floor-to-ceiling windows that look out into the parking lot and are tinted so people can't see in from the outside. I found out later that he got her number, coached her for an interview with a branch nearby who was about to hire her, and God knows what else. I told my friend who was a manager at that other branch about the situation, and they declined her. She ended up filing a complaint with our HR, and my branch manager got fired. Story 49, I twice had to decline to answer certain questions because they involved my security clearance. One was along the lines of what information were you privy to, and the other was sort of a dirt dishing question. So I lied and said AI couldn't discuss that either. Ironically, it was a lawyer doing the interview, so you'd think I'd be more aware of the duty of confidentiality. Story 50, it wasn't a question, but I interviewed for a design job with a print company. In the CEO's office, he had several photographs of himself, dressed as Jesus Christ, surrounded by children, reenacting famous depictions of Jesus. He left me alone in his office ever so briefly, and I just got up and left. Story 51, not an interview, but a coworker once asked another coworker of mine who was Indian and Hindu, "Wait, so you're Hindu? Aren't you afraid you'll be punished for believing the wrong thing after you die?" Who even has that kind of question cross their mind? Not appropriate for the workplace or anywhere for that matter. Story 52, the bitchy ex-nurse manager at the LGBT health center I used to work for asked one of my straight-looking but lesbian friends if she was even a lesbian during her interview, implying, "Why do you even want to work here since you aren't even gay?" It's actually ironic considering the bitchy ex-nurse manager is now not even really gay and in a relationship with a man.